All right. Welcome to the Finance Essentials podcast with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson. Hopefully that's pretty obvious. um, Hopefully you're all doing well out there. First off, let me start like I normally do by thanking you, the audience, for tuning in on a weekly basis and listening to the show that I put out every week. I know it's greatly appreciated. I always get a lot of great feedback from the listening audience, and it really helps me to be able to make the show better. And so one of the things that I would like to request from you guys right now, before we even get into anything else, because this is a hard show, so it took a little bit of additional research, had to put a little bit of effort into it, and really try to understand how to put it together to make sense in the proper context of how I like to do the show. So before we get into that, I need one favor, or I guess multiple favors from you guys. I need you to, wherever you listen to the show, hit subscribe, hit like, hit share if you get some good value out of it. And then also to follow us on social media. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, we're on LinkedIn. I'm getting Instagram followers, and if you're an Instagram follower, I really apologize. I haven't really put much content on Instagram, but I will get Instagram alerts that, so-and-so has started to follow you, and I feel really bad because I don't really put anything on there, or at least I haven't. But I really appreciate the follows on Instagram as well. But that would mean a lot to me, because that would also let me know that people are tuning in, they're listening, and they're following along. So subscribe, like, follow on social media. That's all a big help. Another thing too that you guys can do that would be super helpful, if you check out the website on financeessentials.io, on the home page there's a spot where I do a short video, and below it you sign up for the Finance Essentials cheat sheet. Put your email address in there. That will also get you added into the newsletter. I try to send out something on a weekly basis, generally linked to the podcast. But if you can, go to the site, sign up there. That would be super helpful for me too, and let me know that you guys are listening. One more thing before we dive into it, something that I've been thinking about doing for a while. In January, what I want to do in January is make January Entrepreneur Month. And what that means is that I want to basically, because I know we talk a lot about financial impacts on business, what the business environment is looking like currently, what we can do to achieve that level of financial freedom that we all deserve. I think it'd be super valuable for me to interview business owners and entrepreneurs that are across different industries, and really break down, what type of industry that they're in, how COVID has impacted it, how they respond to finances and manage financials, but then also to what some of their struggles and their successes have been, and how they can teach us to make our businesses more successful, and learning experiences that they've also achieved along the way. So I want to organize that for January. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on it. I'm starting to organize and set up some interviews and different businesses and companies right now. Some of them are going to be, they're all going to be really great, but some of them are businesses that I have no idea about. And so we're all going to learn as we go. And if you guys happen to have any suggestions or ideas or of entrepreneurs that we can interview, send them on over. I love hearing that type of feedback. So we'll go ahead and dive into the show. What I wanted to review and look at this week deals with robots and automation. And is automation and the introduction of more robots something that we should fear? One of the things I'm assuming that a lot of you have read about, and maybe even seen, is the introduction of robots potentially impacted by COVID, right? So what I mean by that is certain industries that have been damaged a lot by COVID, businesses are starting to implement robots as a way of preventing spread to employees, but also increase efficiency, because if it's a scenario where people need to stay home for whatever reason, a robot can't really get COVID, right? So it's more reliable, and so companies are starting to implement that. And so I was really struggling this week doing research for the show, because I wanted to really break down, what robotics and automation is currently doing, and what's going on with it currently, and then kind of the history and how we should look at that as professionals and as business owners, and then also to how that would apply to us on a daily and weekly basis. And so the article that I'm starting off with this week, kind of as the foundation for the show, is called Robots Once Seen as Job Killers Now Protect Workers from COVID. And it's from Bloomberg. And so I'll read just a couple of clips here, and we'll kind of look into it a little bit more. And so it says, for decades, the attitude of unions and their advocates to increase automation could be summed up in one word: no. They feared that every time the machine was slipped into a workflow, a laborer lost its job. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced small but significant shift in that calculation. Because human contact spreads the disease, some machines are now viewed not exclusively as the worker's enemy, but also as their protector. That has accelerated the use of robots this year in a way no one expects to stop, even after the virus is conquered. The impact of technology on employment has been a topic of anxiety and study for generations, with mixed results. Cars didn't kill trains, television didn't end the radio. When banks installed ATMs, they hired more people, not fewer, because the variety of their services grew. But machines have eliminated many jobs, and the current wave will prove to be no exception, especially with public health being a top concern. And so they kind of go on to talk a little bit about that. One thing that they did point out was the mention of a lot of union pushback. I have had the experience of working with unions in the past. I'm not a big union fan. I definitely support collective bargaining. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. But even though I'm not a big fan, at least the unions that I worked with, they did serve some purposes, right? So there were some advantages and some disadvantages. I don't need to really go into too many details on that. But one of the things that I did encounter a lot when working with unions is that when you were a part of a union and you worked with unions, their roles were very specialized. And so, for example, doing conventions and trade shows, it wasn't uncommon to have 2, 3, 4, sometimes 4 different unions represented on the floor. And so the perfect example of this is that I had a coworker of mine that was doing a convention in Chicago, and there was a pallet that was left on the floor. And so a couple of gentlemen were walking by, and she said, "Hey, I really need this pallet to be moved. The show is about to open." And they looked at her and they said, "I'm not in that union. That's not my job." And so she was like, "All right." And so then a gentleman drove by on a forklift, and she's like, "Hey, I need this pallet to be moved. The show is about to open." And he said, "I'm not in that union. That's not my job." And the same thing happened again with a third one. And so eventually she just moved it herself. Now, in that world, especially in Chicago, they could have had a grievance filed against them from the union because she did a union person's job when she wasn't supposed to. But she's like, I couldn't find someone who was in the union that was able to move pallets off of the floor, so I had no choice. And so it's kind of a quick anecdote to show that they do serve their purposes, but one thing that they will definitely do is push back against change, which is essentially what automation and the introduction of robots are. And so while it can be good for a while, what you end up have happen is a lot like you see with automobile manufacturing, is you see pushback, negotiation, and then the entire plant gets shut down. So it goes from we wouldn't necessarily bend, we're not going to be flexible in this regard, to now none of us have jobs. And so that's kind of essentially what would end up happening a lot of times in that scenario. But again, they do tend to serve a lot of their purposes. But what they do after that is they go into some additional quotes. So, for example, David Autor, an economist from MIT, mentions that when we come out of this crisis and labor is cheap again, firms will not necessarily roll back these inventions. And then he goes on to say, bus drivers, sandwich vendors, janitors that support office jobs are way down year over year because people aren't commuting into their offices anymore. So administration support are down 700,000 since last year. Retail is down 500,000. Transportation and warehousing is down 100,000. And so what that means is that the business world is changing, right? And so a lot of people who are saying, well, as we introduce in robots and as we introduce in automation, these are all people whose jobs will be lost. But one of the things that they don't consider is, how does the world change for the better when it comes to automation? One of the easiest examples, I think, is agriculture, right? So in 1820, over 70%, almost 75% of the entire country worked in agriculture. You basically lived on a farm, you worked on a farm. I'm sure a lot of listeners have grandparents or great grandparents or great great grandparents that had 8, 9, 10 people in their family because their job was to, take care of the farm. That's what their job was. And if you had a large family, you could help take care of the farm. Well, in 1990, it was down to 2%. Right? So now that's a long transition period. I mean, you're talking about over 150 years. But, what ended up happening is now we all have food. We don't have to work with farm animals, and we don't have to work with our own labor to be able to achieve the level of being able to put food on the table. Another good example is manufacturing. I know manufacturing tends to be kind of a peg in terms of the health of the economy, but in 1945, about 40% of Americans worked in manufacturing. Now it's down to less than 9%. A lot of it has been shipped offshore, to save labor costs, and a lot of people tend to look at saying, oh, well, we're exporting middle-class jobs, well-paying jobs, union jobs, and for cheaper foreign labor. But I hate to tell you guys this, if it wasn't shipped off to additional foreign labor, it would have already been replaced by robots. I don't think it's a big surprise to any of you guys that a lot of assembly lines, a lot of manufacturing is now done by machines. It's essentially, we monitor machines making those machines. So the argument, in my opinion anyway, that as we automate and as we speed up robot creation in manufacturing, that it's offshoring a lot of these jobs. Those jobs most likely would have gone away anyway. Maybe not in the same exact time frame. Maybe it would have shifted a little bit, but they would have gone away. One of the examples that I really found that really shed a lot on how ludicrous some of these protectionism ideas could be is that in the late 1890s, there was an act that was in London, and it was called the Red Flag Act. And this was right around the introduction of self-propelled vehicles, right? So think about the introduction of the car. And so the Red Flag Act actually stated that a self-propelled vehicle had to be led by somebody waving a red flag in front of them. And so if you were on a self-propelled vehicle, you actually had to have someone in town walking ahead of you with a red flag. That was basically saying, you need to follow me, I'm directing traffic. Now, it started because of steam engines and trains, but the act actually applied to self-propelled vehicles as well. And then on top of that, it required a 2 mile per hour speed limit in the city, as well as a 4 mile per hour limit outside of the city. And so essentially, if you wanted a self-propelled vehicle, it would basically go slower than you could ride a bicycle. I mean, you could ride a bicycle faster than you would be able to ride these cars. But what happened is people were afraid. They were afraid that there was this self-propelled vehicle, and no one knew how to react. So everyone goes, well, we need to slow it down. We need to restrict it as much as possible. Now, obviously, that didn't survive. That didn't live. But what they didn't do is they didn't embrace what they were given. They weren't embracing this gift that said, wow, this thing is fast. This thing is going to get us from point A to point B a lot faster. This thing is going to really increase and drive productivity and make all of our lives better. A lot of times, going back to the manufacturing piece of it, a lot of times people will look at these things kind of like job programs. So for example, a lot of people will look at fast food employees and low and unskilled labor jobs, especially too with the press for the $15 minimum wage, which maybe I'll go maybe I'll do an episode on that. Maybe I'll do an episode on minimum wage. I think that one would probably be a pretty good one. But what they're looking at is they're saying, hey, these guys deserve to have $15 an hour, because you can't really survive on less. And then if you increase the use of robots and automation, these people aren't going to have anything to do. And so a lot of people actually look at things like fast food labor and unskilled and low skilled work as sort of a jobs program. And so I heard a story and I read a story about Milton Friedman, who is one of my favorite economists of all time. I've read a couple of his books, and a lot of his economic theory really makes a lot of sense. But there was one story that really stood out to me and really helped put the theory of labor fluidity, or the economic principle of labor fluidity, in perspective. Essentially what it says is, as markets shift in a free moving society, labor will shift where it's required. So similar, like we talked about with the farms and with manufacturing, as the demands for those jobs go down, you will have an element of people that are left behind, but the majority of people and the future labor force will find another place to fill, the labor need. So it's not that as you reduce down all of these farms and all of this, that people are just completely left in the dark. It's that labor will shift from place to place to fill the needs of the next wave of jobs that are open. But the story of Milton Friedman was in the 1960s, and he was touring an Asian country, and they were looking at a canal that was being built. And what Milton noticed is that they were using a lot of hand tools. So think a lot of shovels, think a lot of digging equipment, wheelbarrows, things of that nature. And he asked them, and he said, hey, I noticed that you guys are using shovels and a lot of manual labor here, when you could be using a lot of motorized equipment that would really speed up and increase productivity, and you guys would be able to get this done faster. And they looked at him and they said, well, Mr. Friedman, this is actually a jobs program. We just want these people to be able to work. And so Mr. Friedman basically looked at him and said, oh, this is a jobs program. I thought this was a canal and you guys are building a canal. Well, if it's a jobs program, why are you giving these men shovels when you should be giving them spoons? And so that really hammered home to where, if you want to look at something as a jobs program and you're wanting to look at something that will keep people where they are, then make it as labor intensive as possible, and then they're going to need as much of it. But if the goal is to actually increase productivity, then we need to allow this type of automation, and we need to allow these types of introductions of robots, because what it's going to do is it's going to usher in another level of prosperity for the people who are going to be able to reap those rewards. We don't have to do backbreaking labor on a farm anymore. And so that really hit home to me when they were really talking about a lot of pushback when it came to robots as well as automation. And for me personally, I'm kind of torn. So for example, one of the examples that I came across was Miso Robotics, and they have a robot named Flippy. Kind of a dumb name, but the idea behind Flippy is that a restaurant can basically pay Miso for Flippy, and they pay approximately $2,000 a month for Flippy. I'm assuming that's maintenance costs, and monitoring and that kind of thing. But they pay $2,000 a month, and it cooks and flips your burgers, and it's able to make your restaurant run more efficiently because it's using this robot. Now, if you take a look at it from a labor standpoint, say for example, and like we discussed earlier, as far as the push for $15 an hour. Now, if you had a worker that you were paying $15 an hour, and that worker works, say, 50 hours or 50 weeks out of the year, 40 hours a week, on top of fringe benefits, things along those lines, just salary-wise, it comes out to be about $31,000 a year. And so you add some additional benefits, things along those lines, assuming that they're full time, it comes out to be about $40,000 a year. So you're paying about $40,000 a year for this $15 an hour worker. According to what I read about Flippy, is that if you run Flippy based off of a standard schedule, work week, whatever, Flippy can basically work for about $3 an hour. Assuming that he takes the place of two people that are working the line in your restaurant, you're talking about approximately $24,000, $25,000 a year for cost for Flippy, at the expense of $80,000 a year of human labor. And so the cost savings and the cost benefit analysis of that is massive. It makes a lot of sense for people who are running a restaurant, who are already working with relatively low margins, to go that route where it's worth it for them a lot of times to be able to look into the automation. Now, one of the other things that I've also read about is that there are, say, bartender robots, that can make, say, 1,000 different drinks. For me personally, if there was a bar in town that only had robot staff, bartenders and that kind of thing, and then a traditional bar, you may have one bar, the robot one, where the bartenders, everything is going to taste exactly the same, right? Because it's programmed in exactly how much of what to put into what drink, so consistency is going to be there. Your speed is probably going to be there. I'd be very hard pressed to know if the speed between the two, as far as making drinks and stuff go. But when I go to a bar, when I go out, I like the homely feel of it, right? I like going in and being surrounded by people and having the warmth and the energy where you're surrounded by that. And I think a bartender plays a lot into that. So what you end up doing in that scenario is, if you're a bartender or a bar owner and you're looking at getting a robot like that, those are the types of soft costs that you would need to factor in. And so it may not, as a bar owner, make sense to actually hire a robot bartender, because you might actually lose a lot of your clientele. A lot of those soft skills that bartenders possess is really what helps drive value to a lot of those establishments. And so it may not make sense for those guys to have one. So just because somebody like Flippy may be a lot more cost effective when it comes to labor capital, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be the best solution. And so that's also something that we really need to consider. And so the next piece that I really wanted to look at was, and again, this is my finance brain, and as we discuss, trying to achieve financial security and financial freedom for you and for everyone that you know, and to be able to achieve the maximum amount of success that we can. And so that way we're able to help out, we're able to be charitable to those around us. I thought it would be very important to know what jobs in the foreseeable future are really anticipated to be impacted by robots and automation. One of them I actually was reading a little bit about was the fear of when spreadsheets were originally introduced, right? So when spreadsheets were originally introduced, a lot of people were like, well, this is going to kill our bookkeeping. This is going to kill our administration. This is going to kill our reporting. But what it did was it shifted it, right? It allowed us to not necessarily focus on those menial tasks of doing everything by hand. Now we had a spreadsheet where we were able to organize a lot of it. So that was one of the ones that I read about that actually impacted me personally, because I'm like, well, in my job, I look at spreadsheets all day long, and I can't ever get rid of those things. And so I couldn't imagine ever trying to do that by hand, especially when you're talking about hundreds of thousands of data points that you're looking at on a regular basis. And so what I did was I found an article from Forbes that talked about the top 13 jobs that will be automated by 2030. So if you're thinking that your job could potentially be automated, the answer is it probably can. I know me working in finance that beyond a shadow of a doubt that at some point in time, my job will most likely be able to be automated. Now, what the end results might be, I don't really know, but I know a lot of it will be able to be automated because there is a certain element of it that is just data collection, right? So the part that would be difficult would be really being able to interpret that data to provide to the business leaders to help them make those types of decisions to help drive the business forward. But when it comes to the actual data collection itself, assuming that your data is good, which we talk a lot of on the webinar in terms of having good quality data, that part of my job could absolutely be automated. I could potentially automate myself out of a job, which, I don't know. For all you hiring managers out there, if you got a resume from somebody that said, well, I left my previous job because I automated myself out of it, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that means that you'd be hired. I don't know, but it is possible. And so the top 13 jobs that they anticipate to be automated by 2030, and I'll go through them real quick and hit on a couple of them that really seem to be interesting to me, is insurance underwriting, warehouse and manufacturing, which I think a lot of us have seen as far as a lot of Amazon warehouses and the like, customer service. So customer service is a very interesting one. There's a good chance that if you've interacted with any major tech companies online as far as customer service goes, you've probably interacted with a bot or with AI. I know when I was at Expedia several years ago, that was a big initiative that they were actually pushing, was introducing that. It's even to the point where over the phone, I've heard conversations where it's very difficult to tell that what you're actually talking to is an AI. Research and data entry, kind of like we just talked about. Production line evolution, I don't think that one's much of a surprise. Local TV advertising, basically that was a lot of automated collection of entries and then plugging those into the television shows. Pharmaceutical discovery, a lot of that was mostly processes. So the process aspect of pharmaceutical discovery is something that they anticipate to be automated. Banking services and retail checkout, similar to self-checkout lines at grocery stores. I know when I used to work at JP Morgan Chase, they were really introducing ATMs and kiosks that could really help out a lot with a lot of your standard transactions, cash withdrawals, balance checking, deposits, that kind of thing. But one of the things too, and this is a small side tangent, is that when those types of kiosks and ATMs and that type of thing were being introduced, one of the things that a lot of people also don't consider is it allows them to open up to more services, right? So something that would require more of a human touch. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I worked at JP Morgan was being able to help business owners and customers analyze their finances, right? So if we don't have a lobby of 10 people that were waiting because they needed to look into whatever issues they might be because they were able to take care of it through the automated system, is we would have had more time to sit down with those customers and really provide that human touch and say, hey, you know what? I noticed that on the 14th of every month, you're getting this automatic $25 charge. What is that? Is that important? And they go, oh, you know what? I actually forgot about that. And next thing you know is you're helping somebody to save hundreds of dollars a year because they were getting this automatic charge that they completely forgot about because it was getting caught in between all of the other transactions. They didn't notice it. So the ability in the services level increasing by freeing up a lot of those simple processes is really a huge step forward. Outbound sales. So the outbound sales automation talks a lot about automatic email distributions and that kind of thing to drive sales. I know I mentioned earlier in the show as far as signing up my for my newsletter and the Finance Essentials cheat sheet, that actually will send you out an automatic email once you sign up for it. Fast food, we already talked about kind of with Flippy. Long haul trucking. Trucking is a very interesting one. I had actually read that one of the goals and one of the potential ways that this would play out would be is that you have essentially a truck depot outside of large metropolitan areas where a lot of drivers are there, and what they do is that they send automated self-driving trucks, we'll just say from Texas to California, and all along on the interstate is basically all automated trucks. And then once it gets close to the metro area that it's going, it would actually stop at the depot, and then a truck driver would basically take it from there to its final destination. The truck driver would be able to help navigate through traffic. It would help navigate through construction. It would help navigate through maybe a bridge is too low, right? I'm sure probably a lot of us have seen those funny, well, maybe they're not quite so funny if you're a truck driver, but those funny videos where a truck tries to drive below a bridge, but that bridge is actually too low, and so the entire top of the truck gets ripped off. Those types of local drivers would be able to know pieces like that, and they would be able to navigate. But the long haul part where they're just on the interstate could totally be done by a self-driving vehicle. And then delivery services, I think some of us have already seen, some local delivery services and things that have started to become automated. And then the last one that they put in there is that any task that can be learned, right? And so what it means by any task that can be learned is think about parts of your job that are repetitive, something that you do on a regular basis that is actually very repetitive in the sense that you do the same thing on a daily or weekly basis. And you may actually already have automated processes that you do where you dump some data in, it filters through here, you refresh this, and your end result spits out on the other side. And so that's already a piece of automation. But then obviously it could potentially go even further than that. And so those are the big 13 areas that Forbes talks about. And what I really wanted to do at the end of it is really drive home the point that I mentioned earlier and like we talk about on the show is, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to my business? What does this mean to my career? And what it means is that automation and robots is not something that we should fear. If we didn't have automation, if we didn't have robots, if we didn't have the introduction to those pieces of our lives now that we had before, we wouldn't be able to achieve the level of success that we had. A lot of us wouldn't be able to work from home on a computer, and instead of having to go into the office and potentially have to worry about a pandemic. And so we shouldn't look at ways of prohibiting this type of growth and this type of productivity increasing from robots and automation. We should embrace that. There's a lot of people out there that would love to have a career that's based on something that they're doing that's awesome, but it's creative, right? And so, if you're able to actually have humans focus on a lot of creative jobs, maybe you're an artist. I don't really have a lot of creativity. My art skills are terrible. I can't play an instrument. I'm not really good at any of that kind of human creativity. But if you are, and you're allowed to start a business to where you're able to create some level of automation, some type of leveraging robots to help create your basic standard of living, then you don't necessarily need to make $100,000 a year off of your art. Or even if you did, maybe it's because you're able to participate in part of the labor force where some things are able to be automated and you're able to apply that part of the creativity to it. Again, going back to finance, right? The parts of my job that I can automate, I would love to do that, because what that would allow me to do is that would allow me to spend time doing proper analysis on business mix. That would allow me to do proper analysis on variances. That would allow me to increase the scope of my current role, because I'm not necessarily worried about all of those menial tasks. And so the value that I would be able to bring, or the value that you would be able to bring to a greater organization, would be a lot larger than it would be at the current time. And so if you're able to embrace that and use that and understand that says, hey, I can actually use this to my advantage, then you're going to be better off than the majority of people. And if you're one of those people, again, especially if you fall into one of these categories, or if you believe that, hey, in the next 10 years, there's a very good chance that my job is going to be automated, it might be time to get out. Now's the time to go to places like Skillshare to learn some additional skills and really look to the future in terms of understanding where you can go and where you can take your career to be able to achieve that next level. And so that way, when automation does catch up, you're not sitting around going, man, what happened? I did not see this coming at all. And if you're listening to the show and you don't get that out of it, you need to go back and listen again, man, because it's coming. I mean, it's going to come for a lot of us. And so that's the show for this week. like I said, I really wanted to focus on it. I thought the introduction of robotics and automation during this COVID climate was super interesting, and there were some other pieces, that I really wanted to lay out. So like I said, follow us on social media. Check out the website. Sign up for the cheat sheet. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Let me know what you think about Entrepreneur Month. I think it's a great idea. You guys might think it's terrible, but let me know. And enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great holiday, and I'll talk to you later. All right, bye.